Hi, this is Margaret Byrd, and welcome to Color Quest, and welcome to a new viewpoint in my dye studio, otherwise known as my house. You can see in the background, the kitchen, lots of things going on back there. But on this table here is my latest series of artwork. And although you know me here as someone who works with natural color, you might not know that I, in fact, don't do any of the traditional fiber arts like knitting, sewing, weaving, quilting, but rather I make two-dimensional and three-dimensional work using the natural colors that I make and different kinds of fibers that I dye and print. After the video I had here on Hollyhock, where I visited Tessa, my artist friend in Den Haag in the Netherlands, I showed a little bit of that work, and I had some people comment that they didn't know that I actually dabbled in all of these other things. So today, I'd like to show you my latest work so you learn a little bit more about what I do within my own studio and how I have incorporated the wide world of natural color into my own art practice. So my art story goes back a long ways. I'm not going to go into that at this stage. If anyone's interested in learning more about it, just let me know in the comments below and I'll film some more about my art school experience and the way in which I got involved with natural color. However, today's video, I just want to talk specifically about 3 events that happened last year that were the catalyst to my current body of work entitled Leave It. Now, as a professional artist, I am constantly seeking out more knowledge and different techniques and so forth. And I do that through going to workshops as well as my artist residencies. And last year I had 3 things, actually I had 4 that were pretty incredible. The first was a workshop with an artist by the name of Ellen Noble. I took a workshop with her to study resist dyeing and discharge with indigo. From that I created a lot of really cool different prints using stitch, shibori, and lime resist, clay resist, and other things. And I just had a whole bunch of samples that I loved, wasn't quite sure what to do with them, but the second workshop I went to was an Encaustic workshop, and that also was phenomenal. It was a week-long event called Encaustic Camp. It's not happening anymore, but I spent a week with all of these wonderful artists who are interested and working with wax in their own practices. And Encaustic is something I had wanted to do for years, decades maybe even. And considering that it's wax and natural, that just kind of fits in with everything else. The third thing that I did last year was I went on a residency both in Peru and Mexico, as you saw in videos here. And I did a lot of botanical printing while I was there on my own. I didn't share a lot of that with you, but because of Color Quest and exploring different techniques with natural color, botanical printing is something I've been trying out. It's not something I thought I would ever become interested in my own artwork, but after the printing that I did while I was on residency, I decided that this was something that I wanted to start incorporating in my own work. So with those 3 classes in mind, my new series called Leave It was born. Oh yeah, and the fourth thing was the International Fungi and Fiber event that I went to. And although I didn't use that in Leave It, that also was a pretty incredible event that I'll definitely be going to in the future. So what I'd like to do is show you how those 3 different events influenced this new series of encaustic work that utilizes all botanically printed fibers, both paper and textile, into different 2-dimensional works that are embedded in wax. Let's go take a look at those. So this is some raw footage. You are seeing the inside of my home/studio exactly the way it looks most of the time. There's hardly ever any space around because I got so much stuff everywhere that I am working on, because as an artist, it's also great to be working on different things. However, behind me is all of the encaustic work that I spent building in the springtime this year. I want to talk about each one of those events and how they influenced. So let's first start with the Indigo Resist workshop that I did. I want to show you some pieces and what they're about and how I embedded those in wax to create a few of my favorite pieces. Actually, I love those, and how those fiber pieces were the first ones that I started embedding in my encaustic class. So they're all connected. Now, something about wax is really hard to translate in video or photographs. It is so luscious and almost has this really soft marble stone-like quality, or at least the way I worked with wax. So by showing you these pieces a little bit closer, I'm hoping that you might get a better sense of what encaustic looks like and just the overall richness of it. I wish that I could invite all of you in so you could see it in real life, because it really is spectacular to see it with your own eyes and even like touch it, because it is just really yummy. So let's look at the first 3 pieces. So these 3 pieces utilize the stitch resist and the discharge technique that I learned in Ellen Noble's class. And you can see those small pieces of fiber where I did all different kinds of things to create these different patterns. So that is a shibori stitch. This was a discharge process where we removed indigo with permanganate, which creates this beautiful brown. And this is either a soy lime or a clay resist print that I made and then discharged. And you can see that discharge process here again, all on little pieces of cotton, actually. Here's the second piece. This is a binded shibori technique where I bound to create those simple shapes and then did the permanganate discharge process. Here is a stitch resist with indigo that then I completely removed the indigo to create that white background. It was a really cool process. Here's a combo with a soy lime print that I then used that discharge process to remove the background color. And then finally, these all were done with probably clay resist and indigo, and then followed by that discharge process. By embedding this in the wax, I'm just adding this really ghost-like quality to it. And you can see, if I go down to the side, just how lovely and stone-like the wax is It really enhances the overall pieces. I love it. They're made on these really thick pine boards, and then I embedded them all together. I love these pieces. It was a real launching point for me in terms of creating more simple work, which I've been looking at, and also incorporating the wax. Let's move on to the next one. Here are two more pieces that I made. This was with shibori stitch, and you use thread to tighten the fiber itself and different kinds of stitches. I am not someone who's done anything with hand stitching. I found it to be really hard, but the overall effect is super beautiful. And when you embed them in wax, again, it just adds a whole nother element to it. This whole section here was scraped back with the wax and weathered the fiber itself. But to me, that just adds a whole nother beautiful element to the design. And again, by putting these on a piece of encaustic board that I then embed on top of another piece of pine, you get these really beautiful, deep pieces. I think they look fantastic together or on their own. This was just, again, a simplification that I've been looking for in my own work. So the second workshop that I did was the Encaustic camp, and that's where I spent a week just working with wax. I had brought the Indigo resist and discharged pieces from Ellen's class as something I wanted to explore, to embed fiber into wax. Now, something that I learned, or at least practiced while I was there, was this idea of monoprinting on a Gelli plate. I have had a Gelli plate. I have tried to work with a Gelli plate for years and never really had a lot of success. But in this class, we simply took different leaves and we made different prints on a Gelli plate, but with oil paint. And I don't normally work with oil paint, but that was the secret sauce. Because it was oil paint, it didn't dry as fast, and I was able to lift multiple prints. So from that, I made some very precise prints of a few different leaf shapes, and the prints were a little too exact for me. So what I did was I took those prints and I cut them up, and from that I designed the next grouping of 3 pieces that I made. So let's look at those. So these 3 pieces really speak to my love of squares. I'm a big fan of squares and grids, and these pieces allowed me to explore that in a little bit of a different way. So this is paper that has been monoprinted on a Gelli plate with some oil paint and prints of different leaf shapes. And you can see, for example, this is the fern. Here's another piece of the fern. And by cutting these up, I embedded them when I designed these grids. And it was a really fun way to make a more, let's say, realistic print turn into something that was much more abstract. You can see how beautiful the wax looks. It covers parts of it. I scraped back a lot to expose more of the paper, and then had pieces where the wax was thicker and just create this more ethereal look, which is something that I really enjoyed working with Encaustic. So one thing I love about this story is the progression and how one thing informs the next. So after learning about this oil paint Gelli printing, I took that knowledge, and when I went to my residency in Peru, I had a lot of time not working with the dye master, and I just started playing around with that with local leaves that I could find. And so I was really taken by the eucalyptus trees that were there, which are not indigenous, but they were everywhere. And so I had a lot of access to those leaves, and I loved the shape of the eucalyptus leaf. And I also was really enamored with Tara. And Tara is used as a tannin, and we had taro trees everywhere there. It wasn't the season for the pod, which is what you use for tannin, but the leaves themselves were really beautiful. So let me show you the taro prints that I made using oil paint and jelly print that I then embedded in wax. This is the taro leaf, and you can see a sort of literal print there. And what I enjoyed about the jelly printing was that I could make 5 different prints from the same print, and that was using ghost prints. So I came up with these 5 different images. Some of them are opposite, and you can see just how different they look, but they're all interconnected. And there are some dark spaces, some light spaces. Love that one of the backgrounds here is dark, and the outline of the ghost print is just that. But together with these 5, they come together, I think, as a really beautiful set that can be shown together. They also stand on their own as separate pieces, or in 2s, 3s, and so forth. So here's another set. This is with eucalyptus leaves. I loved just the long shape of them. And then they just came out so cool when I printed them with the ghost print. And then I switched them, and I actually did a second print where I put the 2 leaves together, the opposite direction, just for some differences. Again, the wax over the top gives them this really ghost-like quality, so they don't become these literal print translations, but some sort of abstraction of the eucalyptus leaf itself. So these 5 are a set, can either be together or on their own. Let me show you one other eucalyptus bunch. While I was in Peru working with the eucalyptus, I was doing a lot of fiber printing on textile with it. And I made a few pots of dye, so I was using them with iron shifting. I was crumbling them up, and I ended up with these really cool small pieces that were very brittly, but I loved the shape and I loved them together. So this is the eucalyptus after all of that has happened, and then again printed on the jelly plate. So this might be my favorite one of this grouping, actually. The pieces of the broken eucalyptus just had this awesome variation of shape, and you can see again those multiple prints off the same print where I got different ghost-like prints and just variations where you have a more literal translation of the leaves as well as just an indication of leaf. And by embedding these in the wax, again, you've got places where the wax is thicker and thinner, and I scratched back so that I could reveal the things within these prints that I really loved. And yeah, they all just kind of came together for me. I think finalizing them with the embedding in the Encaustic just made them these really lovely, very simple pieces. And you can see that stony quality. If I go down here, it's just such a beautiful texture, and it's got a sheen to it, but it's also matted because of how I pulled back the wax. And I think it was a really fantastic way for me to experience botanical printing in a different way. So for the fiber printing that I did on textile, I was focused on doing botanical prints on silk. and trying different things like carrier blankets and iron blankets and so forth. And you know that I love often the blanket itself over the target print, although I did get some pretty spectacular prints on silk. You'll have to wait another 6 or more months to see those. But I took those ghost prints on cotton and then chose to embed those in wax because I really loved the very ethereal quality, almost just like a hint of a print. That is something that I am drawn to, and really excited to be exploring that within my own practice. So let me show you the 3 pieces that I made for Leave It using eucalyptus. This time, however, I also used a blue eucalyptus. It was a different tree that was there and it had a different leaf shape. So let me show you those 3 pieces. So this piece is the ghost of those really long pieces of eucalyptus. Obviously, I used iron in the process. The silk is almost black. It's really beautiful, but I wanted to do something with the ghost side or the iron blanket side. And I just loved how these came out. These leaves, you can see the different spaces where the iron interacted with the leaf, creating this lovely speckled effect. And then adding this layer of wax over the top, I was able to create these different shapes and so forth. You can see again that surface is just so lovely. And these are on these nice thick pine boards. So they come away from the wall when they're hung. Let me show you the other 2 with the blue eucalyptus. Here are the 2 pieces using the blue eucalyptus. Again, this was done with iron. I believe that the dye that I used for this was actually chilka dye, which was a plant that I was using with Maria, my dye master, to make yellows and greens. And this was the iron blanket ghost print that came about. Loving this just essence of leaf. And then this one, maybe my favorite of the bunch. I really like simplicity. It is just the slightest lines here of the leaves. You can see a little bit of the color was picked up from the leaves themselves, but I really loved how this turned out. Again, adding the wax, you can see I was able to make super interesting different textures and depths. There's real depth working with wax. It creates this sort of illusion of something being deep inside of these layers, and they are very ethereal. I keep using that word, but that's really what they are. Love these pieces, both 12 by 12. Because I had made those original pieces with the very small indigo discharge pieces and then embedded those in wax, I decided to do a few more pieces in a similar fashion, but using some of the different leaves that I printed while I was in Peru and also Mexico. This one incorporated different prints on textile. This is actually an indigo leaf. Here are chilka, and then chilka with iron. And you can see it's just again a hint. This was the ghost print. This was a more literal print. Then we have the ghost print of a geranium leaf that I did while I was in Mexico. And then just to kind of balance it out, you can barely see those chilka leaves in there, but it's there and also there. But it's just a hint. So putting these pieces together using that same technique, placing them on an encaustic board and then embedding that, giving it that sculptural feeling. So This was the fresh leaf indigo from my own garden, and I couldn't resist. I had to just do one fresh leaf indigo piece. This fiber was a test fiber that I was doing because I made a bunch of cards for a class that I taught on fresh leaf indigo. And this was the barrier cloth that I used to do that. And I just love the way it looked. If you want something that's a little more literal, but still has that really yummy wax marble feel to it, this piece just hit the mark on that. I mean, look at that. I'm so excited for fresh leaf indigo season too. So there it is, Leave It. Obviously a reference to the fact that everything that I have in that series came from a leaf of some sort, whether that was indigo or eucalyptus or fern. All of this work is available for sale, plus other things in my shop, which is included in the description below. It's in every video. So head over there and take a look at it if you're interested in it. And there's some other things there. You might see some of my fiber collage, which I continue to do, but also all of my installation photographs, and that's where it all started. So thank you for taking the time to spend with me looking at the way in which I utilize natural color and botanical printing in my own practice. A lot of it thanks to you, because without Color Quest I would never have explored at least the world of botanical printing, and then to see it enter into my work is really exciting. So Encaustic, love it. If you haven't tried it, you should. If you are an artist out there and have been curious about it, it's definitely worth trying out. It's a lot of work and it takes patience and practice, but it's a very meditative practice and one that you really can immerse yourself in and find some quiet as you're creating, and that is always a wonderful side effect of being an artist and working with your hands. So next week on Color Quest, let's get back into the dye studio. That's probably more of why you're here, but it's always wonderful to share a little bit more about who I am as an artist and what really inspires me within my own practice. Have a great week, and I will see you next Friday on Color Quest. And the fourth thing was the fungi and the fourth thing was the fiber and fungi and fiber. IFFS, fungi and fiber.